The resort manager didn't lower his voice when he said it. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your daughter isn't included in this reservation." I felt Ava's hand tighten around mine. She looked up at me confused, like this was somehow her mistake. Behind us, my mother and sister stood perfectly still. No surprise, no questions. Just silence. So this wasn't an accident. I stepped closer to the counter. That can't be right. We're all booked under the same family package. The manager hesitated, then turned his screen toward me. My name was there. Every other name was there. Except Ava's. And then he added carefully, "There's a note attached to this booking. From the original reservation holder." He paused, eyes flicking between me and my mother. "Would you like me to read it? If you're watching this from somewhere else, tell me where you are and what time it is where you live. And if you've ever been the only one in the room who didn't get the full story, go ahead and subscribe." Because what I found out next didn't start at that front desk. The thing about moments like that is they don't just stay in the present. They reach backward. Standing there in that bright, polished lobby with strangers glancing over, and my daughter quietly trying not to cry, my mind didn't stay in Florida. It pulled me straight into every other time I'd told myself, it's probably nothing. Because this wasn't the first trip. 3 years earlier, my family had gone to San Diego. I remembered the group text, Lauren sending a photo of the beach house, all glass walls and ocean views, everyone reacting with heart emojis. I typed, "Looks amazing. When are we going?" And my mom had replied, "Oh honey, this one filled up fast. We thought you had that work conference anyway." I didn't, but I'd convinced myself maybe I mentioned something that made them think I was busy. That happens. People misunderstand. Except a month later, I saw pictures. My nephews building sand castles, my mom laughing on the patio, Lauren holding a cocktail with the sunset behind her, and no empty space where Ava should have been. No mention of her at all. The next year, it was Scottsdale. That time, I tried to be more direct. "Is this something Ava and I can join?" I asked on a call with my mom. She'd paused just long enough for me to notice. "Well, it's a smaller place this time, and honestly, it might not be the best environment for kids." Ava was 8, not a toddler, not disruptive, just a kid. Still, I nodded like she could see me. "Okay, maybe next one." There was always a next one. Lake Tahoe, Napa. Vegas, though that one was adults only, which I accepted without pushing. I told myself families evolve, schedules clash, people forget details. I told myself not everything had to include us. And every time my mom would soften it with something gentle. "We'll plan something special just for you and Ava." We never did. At some point, Ava stopped asking. That was the part I didn't let myself sit with for too long. She'd hear me on the phone, hear the names of places, and she'd just go quiet. Then she'd ask if she could go to a friend's house that weekend, or if she could stay late at her after-school program. She adapted faster than I did. Looking back, that should have been my first real alarm. But I was good at explaining things away. It's a skill you learn when you grow up trying to keep peace in a family that values appearances more than honesty. You learn how to translate silence into something harmless. You learn how to take a half answer and turn it into something that doesn't hurt, until it does. The memory that stayed with me most clearly, though, wasn't from a trip we missed. It was from one I almost caught. About 6 months before Florida, my mom had forwarded me an email chain. It was buried between other messages about holiday plans, recipes, things that felt normal. The subject line read, "Carter Family Reservation, Napa Valley." I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I skimmed, saw dates I assumed wouldn't work for me, and moved on. But standing at that front desk with Ava's name missing from a system that clearly knew everyone else's, the email came back to me with a kind of clarity that made my chest tighten, because I remembered something else. There had been an attachment, a PDF. I hadn't opened it, Behind me, I could hear Lauren shifting her weight, the faint click of her heels against the marble floor. My mom cleared her throat soft, almost like a warning. "Reese," she said quietly, "we don't need to make a scene." That word scene landed harder than anything else. Like the problem wasn't what had been done, it was that it might be seen. I didn't turn around. Instead, I looked at the manager again. "Yes," I said, "steady now. I'd like you to read it." But even as I said it, I already knew something had been happening long before we got here. Something organized, repeated, quiet. And suddenly, that unopened PDF didn't feel small anymore. It felt like the piece I'd missed on purpose. That night, after I got Ava settled in the room, I had to book separately on my own card under my own name. I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. Ava didn't complain. She never did. She curled up on the bed with her tablet headphones on, pretending to be absorbed in a game. But I could tell from the way she kept glancing over that she was listening for something. For me to explain. For me to fix it. "I'm just checking some emails," I told her gently. She nodded like that was enough. It wasn't. I logged into my inbox and typed one word into the search bar: reservation. Hundreds of results came up. Newsletters, confirmations, things I'd booked myself. I narrowed it down, filtered by my mom's email address, then by attachments. That's when I found it. Subject line: Carter Family Reservation, Napa Valley. Date 6 months ago. Attachment guest list. Final. Die PDF. I clicked. The file opened slowly like it had weight to it. A clean, professional layout resort logo at the top, dates aligned neatly on the right, then a list of names organized by room. Room 101, Diane Ellis, Richard Ellis. Room 102, Lauren Carter, Mark Carter. Room 103, Ethan Carter, Lucas Carter. I scanned down. Room 104, Reese Ellis. Just me. No +1, no child, no note. I kept scrolling, hoping maybe Ava's name had been placed somewhere else. A shared room, an overflow bed, anything. Nothing. At the bottom of the document, there was a section labeled Notes. That's where my eyes stopped. Guest list adjusted per host request. No explanation, no detail, just that one line. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Host request. That meant it wasn't a capacity issue. It wasn't a last-minute change. It was intentional. Planned ahead of time. Written down in a document that everyone organizing the trip had seen, including Lauren. I went back to the email chain. There were more messages than I remembered. Lauren had replied to my mom, "Looks perfect. Just keep it as discussed." As discussed. I clicked into the earlier part of the thread. My mom had sent the initial booking details, then followed up with a short note. "Please make sure the arrangements reflect our final guest list." And then a separate message to the resort. "Remove the minor previously mentioned. Thank you." I felt something in my chest go very still. Not sharp, not explosive, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when something finally makes sense in a way you can't unsee. I scrolled further down and found another attachment I hadn't noticed before. Room assignments updated.df. This one had timestamps. Each revision logged. Version 1 included an extra line under my name, Ava Ellis, child. Version 2 removed it. Next to the change, there was a note in the margin. Confirmed per L. Carter. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until my lungs forced me to take a sharp inhale. So it wasn't just my mom. Lauren had seen Ava's name. She had confirmed its removal. I heard the soft rustle of sheets behind me. "Mom." Ava's voice was small, careful. I turned my chair toward her. She was sitting up now, tablet forgotten in her lap. "Yeah, baby." She hesitated, then asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That question shouldn't have hit as hard as it did. But it did, because it meant she'd already found a way to blame herself. I closed the laptop halfway, not fully, just enough to break the glare of the screen. "No," I said immediately. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." She watched me for a second like she was trying to measure if I meant it. Then why didn't they put me on the list? There it was. No confusion, no guessing, just the truth said plainly. I could have softened it. I could have said it was complicated, that adults make mistakes, that we'd figure it out later. But sitting there with those documents still open behind me, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a mistake. And if I kept pretending it might be, I'd be teaching her to accept it. I stood up and walked over to the bed sitting beside her. I don't know why they made that choice, I said carefully. But it wasn't because of you. She looked down at her hands. It keeps happening. Not a question. A pattern. I swallowed. Yeah, I admitted quietly. It does. We sat there for a moment, the air heavy but clear in a way it hadn't been before. Then she asked, "Are we still going to stay?" That question shifted something, because suddenly this trip wasn't about fitting into their plans anymore. It wasn't about being included or excluded. It was about what I chose to do next. I glanced back at the laptop, at the open files, at the timestamps and notes that turned years of doubt into something solid. Evidence. Not feelings, not assumptions. Proof. Yes, I said finally. We're staying. Ava looked up surprised. Really? Yeah, said, a steadiness settling into my voice that hadn't been there before. But we're not staying for the same reason. She didn't ask me to explain. She just nodded slowly, like she trusted that I would. And as I reached over to close the laptop completely, one thought settled in my mind with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about confronting them anymore. It was about making sure they couldn't do this again, not to Ava, and not using the same quiet, polite excuses that had worked for so long. I didn't confront them that night. Not because I was afraid, not because I didn't have enough proof, but because I'd spent years reacting to half-truths and soft denials, and I wasn't going to walk into another conversation where they controlled the pace, the tone, or the outcome. This time, I needed them to be comfortable first. Comfortable enough to slip. The next morning, I left Ava at the kids' activity center the resort offered. She hesitated for a second before letting go of my hand, scanning the room like she was still unsure where she belonged. "You'll be right here when I come back?" she asked. "I will," I said, crouching to her level. "And we're doing something just us tonight." "Go." That got a small smile. "Okay." I watched her walk in, sign her name on the little check-in board, her own name written clearly like it deserved to be anywhere it was placed. Then I turned and headed toward the breakfast terrace where my family had already gathered. They were laughing. That was the first thing I noticed. Lauren had her sunglasses pushed up on her head, leaning into Mark as she scrolled through something on her phone. My mom, Diane, was mid-story, gesturing lightly with her coffee cup. Everything looked normal, polished, effortless, like nothing had happened the day before. "Morning," I said, sliding into an empty chair. The conversation paused for a fraction of a second. Then Diane smiled. "Reese, did you get everything sorted out with the room?" "Not Ava. The room." "Yeah," I said evenly. "I handled it." Lauren nodded like that confirmed something for her. "Good. These places can be weird about bookings." "Weird." I let that sit between us for a second. Then I said casually, "Yeah, especially when there are special instructions attached." Lauren's hand stilled for just a moment on her phone. It was subtle, but I saw it. Diane took a sip of her coffee. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair. "Right. Because it's totally normal for a system to specifically exclude one person by name." Silence. Mark cleared his throat lightly, like he wasn't sure if he should be part of this conversation. Lauren set her phone down. "Reese, you're reading into it. These bookings get complicated. There are capacity limits policies. I saw the documents," I said, cutting in gently, not raising my voice. "That did it." Lauren's expression didn't collapse. It tightened. Diane's smile faded just enough to show she understood what I meant. I went back through the emails. I continued. The attachments, the revisions. No one spoke. "So I'm not confused," I said. "I just want to understand." Diane set her cup down carefully. "Understand what?" I held her gaze. Why Ava was removed. There it was. Direct. Simple. Lauren let out a short breath, almost a laugh. Removed makes it sound dramatic. What would you call it? I asked. She shrugged slightly, adjusting the guest list. From Ava Ellis to nothing I said. That kind of adjustment. Diane leaned forward, her tone softening. Reese, sweetheart, it wasn't meant to hurt anyone. Sometimes these trips have a certain structure. Structure. I repeated the word in my head. What kind of structure excludes a 9-year-old from her own family? I asked. Lauren's patience thinned. It's not about excluding her. It's about keeping things manageable. You know how these trips are. There are expectations. Whose expectations? I asked. She hesitated. That was the crack. I didn't push harder. Not yet. Instead, I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and said, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like there was a decision made. Not once. Repeatedly. Diane sighed like this was becoming inconvenient. Reese, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. I set the glass down. No, I said quietly. I've been making it smaller for years. That landed. Lauren looked away first. Diane pressed her lips together, then said, we just thought it would be easier this way. There it was again. Easier. For who? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Neither of them answered immediately, and that silence told me more than anything they could have said, because it wasn't about logistics, or space, or timing. It was about preference, choice, and the fact that they thought they could make that choice without ever having to explain it. I stood up slowly, smoothing out my shirt. I'm going to pick Ava up, I said. We'll join you later. Diane reached for something, maybe to soften it, maybe to regain control, but I was already stepping away. I didn't need more from them right now. I had enough. As I walked back through the resort past the manicured lawns and perfectly arranged lounge chairs, one thought stayed steady in my mind. They still thought this was a conversation they could manage, that if they stayed vague enough, calm enough, I'd eventually let it go like I always had. But they didn't know what I'd found. They didn't know about the timestamps, the confirmations, the pattern that turned their easier into something much more deliberate. And more importantly, they didn't know what that meant once it stopped being a family issue and started becoming a legal one. By the time I got to the kids' activity center, I had already made a decision. Not about them, about me. Ava was sitting at a long table, carefully painting a small ceramic turtle. Her tongue peeked out slightly in concentration, the way it always did when she was trying to get something just right. For a moment, I just stood there and watched her, uninterrupted, unexcluded, exactly where she was supposed to be. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. Mom, look, she said, holding up the turtle. I made the shell green because the lady said it's my favorite color. It's perfect, I said, and I meant it, not just the turtle. Her. I signed her out, and we walked back toward the main building together. She slipped her hand into mine again, a little more easily this time. Are we going back to breakfast? She asked. Not right now, I said. I need to stop by the front desk first. She nodded, trusting, even though she didn't know why. When we reached the lobby, Mr. Howard was still there. He recognized me immediately, his expression shifting into something more careful, more professional. Miss Ellis, he said. Is everything all right? Actually, I said, keeping my tone steady, I was hoping you could help me with something. He gestured toward a quieter corner of the desk away from the main line of guests. Of course. I glanced down at Ava. Why don't you sit over there for a minute, okay? I'll be right here. She moved to a nearby chair, still within view, swinging her legs slightly as she waited. I turned back to Mr. Howard. Yesterday you mentioned there was a note attached to our reservation, I said. I'd like a full copy of that record, including any revision history. He hesitated, not defensively, but carefully. That information is typically internal, he said. But given the situation, I can see why you'd ask. I'm not asking you to break policy, I replied. I'm asking what's possible within it. He studied me for a second, then nodded. We can provide a guest-facing summary, he said. And if there were any changes made to your specific booking or associated names, those can be documented. That would be helpful, I said. In writing. He didn't ask why. That told me enough. Give me a few minutes, he said, turning toward his computer. As he worked, I felt something settle into place inside me. Not anger, though, that was still there, steady and controlled, but clarity. For years, everything had lived in gray space. Conversations without proof. Feelings without confirmation. Patterns I could sense but not show. Now it was different. Now there were records. Mr. Howard returned with a printed document and a second page attached. This is a summary of the reservation notes, he explained, handing it to me. And this, he tapped the second page, is a log of modifications tied to your booking group. I took it, scanning quickly. There it was again. Exclude minor Ava Ellis unless additional authorization provided. Below it, timestamps, edits, confirmations. And then a line I hadn't seen before. Guest removal confirmed after discussion with host regarding group presentation. Group presentation. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was so specific, so intentional, so far from an accident. Is this language standard? I asked. Mr. Howard shook his head slightly. No, ma'am. That would have been entered manually based on the host's request. Of course it was. I folded the papers neatly. Thank you, I said. If you need anything further, I will, I said, cutting in gently. And I appreciate your professionalism. He gave a small nod like he understood more than he was saying. I walked back over to Ava, who hopped off her chair the second she saw me coming. All done? She asked. All done, I said. As we headed towards the elevators, she glanced up at me. Are we still doing something tonight? Yeah, I said. We are. She smiled, satisfied with that answer. But as the elevator doors closed, I looked down at the folded papers in my hand. There was something else in that log. A detail that hadn't fully landed until just now. The timing. The confirmations hadn't all happened at once. They'd been spaced out, reviewed, reapproved, which meant this wasn't a one-time decision. It was a process, a repeated choice, and suddenly the idea that this was just about hurt feelings or family dynamics felt smaller than what it actually was. Because if they were using shared funds, if these trips were being presented one way while documented another, then what they'd done wasn't just personal. It crossed into something else, something structured, something that didn't disappear just because we were related. I pressed the elevator button for our floor, and for the first time since we arrived, I wasn't thinking about whether they'd apologize. I was thinking about what happens when people get used to doing something quietly, and then someone decides to put it in writing. I didn't go looking for them right away. Not because I didn't know where they were, I did. My family had a way of settling into routines quickly, like every place they went was already theirs. By noon, they'd be at the pool or the shaded terrace by the bar, rotating between drinks and light conversations that sounded effortless to anyone listening. I took Ava upstairs first. Give me a few minutes, okay? I said as she kicked off her sandals and climbed onto the bed. Why don't you finish your turtle? She nodded, already reaching for the small bag they'd given her at the activity center. I placed the documents on the desk, smoothing them out carefully. There's a difference between having proof and presenting it. I'd learned that from work. I'm a financial compliance analyst. My job is to trace patterns, verify intent, and make sure that what people say matches what actually happened. Most of the time, the difference isn't in the numbers. It's in the wording. Group presentation. That phrase kept sitting there heavier the more I looked at it. Not safety, not capacity, not policy. Presentation. I took a photo of both pages with my phone. Then I emailed them to myself, forwarded them to a secure folder I used for work, and saved a copy to a cloud drive I rarely mentioned to anyone. Redundancy wasn't paranoia. It was protection. When I was done, I turned to Ava. Hey, I'm going to go talk to Grandma for a bit. You okay staying here? She looked up from her painting. Are you going to be mad? The question caught me off guard, not because of what it was, but because of how calmly she asked it. I'm going to be clear, I said. That's different. She studied me for a second, then nodded. Okay. I left the room with the documents in my hand and a version of calm I hadn't felt before. They were by the pool. Lauren was stretched out on a lounge chair, scrolling through her phone again. Mark was talking to someone near the bar. My mom, Diane, was sitting under an umbrella flipping through a menu she probably wasn't reading. I walked straight over. "Can we talk?" I asked. Diane looked up first. "Of course." Lauren glanced at me, then at the papers in my hand. Her expression shifted just slightly. We moved to a quieter corner still within the pool area, but far enough that our voices wouldn't carry. I didn't sit. I placed the papers on the table between us. "This is from the resort," I said. "Reservation notes and modification logs." Diane's eyes flicked down, then back up at me. "Reese, I'm not here to argue," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm here to understand something very specific." Lauren crossed her arms. "You already know what this is about." "Then it should be easy to explain," I replied. I tapped the second page lightly. "Exclude minor Ava Ellis unless additional authorization provided." "That's your request," I said, looking at Diane. "And this?" I slid my finger down the page. "Guest removal confirmed after discussion with host regarding group presentation." "That's the reasoning." Diane's jaw tightened. Lauren exhaled slowly. "Reese, we talked about this. It's not what you're making it into." "I haven't made it into anything yet," I said. "That's why I'm asking." I looked at Diane again. "What does group presentation mean?" She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw something I hadn't let myself see before. Not confusion, not regret. "Calculation. It means," she said, finally choosing her words carefully, "that sometimes we have to consider how things look. These trips aren't just family vacations. There are people we meet, connections we maintain. So Ava doesn't look right?" I asked. "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said," I replied, still calm, just with softer language. Lauren leaned forward. "Reese, you're taking this personally when it's actually practical. You're a single mom. You've always done things your own way. That's fine. But when we're in certain environments, it complicates things." "Complicates what I asked." She hesitated, then said, "Expectations." I let that sit for a second. "Whose expectations?" I asked again. Neither of them answered immediately, so I filled the silence. "Because from what I can see, these trips are funded through the family trust," I said. "Which means they're not just social, they're shared assets." Diane's head snapped up slightly. "This has nothing to do with the trust." "It does, if the funds are coming from it," I said. Lauren shook her head. "You're crossing a line." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finding one." That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Diane straightened in her chair. "Reese, we've always tried to do what's best for the family as a whole." "And where does Ava fit into that?" I asked. "She's part of the family," Diane said quickly. "Then why is she the only one who needs additional authorization to exist on a guest list?" Silence again. Longer this time. Around us, people laughed. Glasses clinked, the soft rhythm of water against the pool edges filled the gaps. It was almost surreal how normal everything sounded while this conversation sat right in the middle of it. Lauren finally spoke. "It was never about excluding her," she said. "It was about keeping things simple." "There's that word again," I said. "Simple, easier, manageable. All the ways people describe a decision that benefits them and costs someone else." I picked up the papers, folding them once neatly. "Okay," I said. "I understand now." Diane looked relieved too quickly. "Good. Then we can move past." "No," I said, stopping her gently. "Understanding doesn't mean agreeing." Her expression shifted again. "Reese, I'm not going to argue with you about whether you meant to hurt her," I continued. "I'm looking at what you did. Repeatedly, documented, funded through shared resources." Lauren's voice sharpened. "What are you implying?" I met her eyes. "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm deciding what to do with it." That was the moment the balance changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but I felt it. Because for the first time, they weren't managing the conversation anymore. They were reacting to it. And as I turned to leave, I could feel their attention follow me, not with confidence, not with control, but with uncertainty. They still didn't know what I was going to do next. And that uncertainty was the first thing that had truly unsettled them. I didn't go back to the room right away. I walked past the elevators, past the polished hallways, and stepped outside instead toward the quieter side of the resort, where the landscaping gave way to a narrow path along the water. It was the kind of place people pass through without really seeing, which was exactly what I needed. For years, I had been reacting, explaining, justifying, softening things so they wouldn't escalate. But clarity changes how you move. I sat on a low-stoned bench and opened my phone, not to call them, not to text, but to pull up something I hadn't looked at in a long time. The Ellis Family Trust. It wasn't a secret. It had been set up by my grandfather decades ago originally to cover education, medical expenses, and family development opportunities, which had later expanded to include travel and shared experiences. That was the language. Shared, equal, documented. I remembered the meeting where it had been explained. I was in my early 20s, still trying to understand what any of it meant. The attorney had been clear in a way that felt almost unnecessary at the time. All beneficiaries are to be treated without discrimination, he'd said. Use of funds must reflect equitable access across the family structure, especially where minors are involved. At the time, it had sounded like standard legal phrasing. Now it sounded like a line someone had decided didn't apply to them. I opened the digital copy I kept stored away, scrolling through until I found the section. There it was. Not vague, not open to interpretation. Clear. I took a screenshot. Then another of the reservation documents. Then I opened my email and drafted a message, not emotional, not accusatory, just factual. Subject clarification request. Trust fund allocation and usage. I paused for a moment before typing, because this wasn't just about sending something. It was about choosing not to keep this contained. I addressed it to the attorney who had last handled our trust updates, a man named Daniel Harper. He wasn't close to the family, which made him useful. Neutral. Bound to the structure, not the relationships. I attached the documents. Then I wrote, I'm requesting a review of recent trust-funded travel arrangements to determine whether allocation and access have been administered in accordance with the trust's non-discrimination clause, particularly as it applies to minor beneficiaries. No drama, no personal commentary, just a question that required an answer. I didn't send it yet. Instead, I saved it as a draft and sat there for another minute, listening to the quiet water, feeling the weight of what this would mean once it left my outbox. Because once it did, this wouldn't stay inside the family. It would move into a space where intentions didn't matter as much as documentation. And documentation was the one thing I had. I stood up and walked back inside. When I reached the room, Ava was sitting cross-legged on the bed, her turtle finished and drying on the nightstand. Hey, she said. I added blue spots. It looks even better, I said. She tilted her head. Did you talk to them? I did. And I sat down beside her. They explained why they made those choices, I said carefully. She waited. And now I'm deciding what that means for us. She seemed to think about that for a second, then asked, Are we still doing something tonight? That question again. Simple. Grounded. Yes, I said. We are. She smiled satisfied and went back to adjusting the little turtle like it needed one more perfect angle. I watched her for a moment, then reached for my phone again. I opened the draft email. Read it once. Twice. Then I hit send. There wasn't a dramatic feeling when it went through. No immediate sense of victory. Just a quiet shift, like something had moved out of my hands and into a system that didn't rely on silence to function. A few hours later, as the sun started to lower, my phone buzzed. New email from Daniel Harper. I opened it. Reese. It began, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Based on the materials you've provided, there are elements here that warrant formal review. I will need to request additional documentation from the current acting coordinators of the trust. Acting coordinators, Diane, Lauren. I read the next line more slowly. In the meantime, I would advise that no further trust-funded expenditures occur without documented approval across all beneficiary branches. I let that settle in. No more quiet bookings. No more adjustments. No more decisions made behind closed doors. Not without leaving a trail. And then at the bottom, I will be reaching out to your mother and sister directly. That was the moment I knew. Not hoped. Not assumed. Knew. They weren't going to be able to keep this small anymore. And for the first time, the silence they had relied on so heavily was no longer theirs to control. The message reached them faster than I expected. I found out the next morning, not through my email, not through the attorney, but through the way my phone lit up with my mother's name at 7:12 a.m. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. By the fourth call, I picked up not out of urgency, but because I wanted to control when the conversation started. Reese Diane said immediately, her voice tight in a way I'd rarely heard before. "What did you do?" I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the window looking out at the ocean that had felt like an escape just days ago. "I asked for a review," I said. "You went to Daniel," she said, skipping right past any attempt at softness. "You involved him in a family matter. It stopped being just a family matter when shared funds were used to exclude a beneficiary," I replied calmly. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "You're twisting this," she said. "You're making it sound like something it's not." "I didn't write the notes in the reservation system," I said. "I didn't remove Ava's name. I didn't confirm those changes. I'm not twisting anything. I'm reading what's already there." Silence. Then, more controlled, more deliberate. "Do you understand what this could do?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I documented it." She exhaled slowly like she was trying to reset the conversation. "Reese, listen to me. These reviews, they escalate. They bring in people who don't understand how our family works. They don't see context." "They don't need context," I said. "They need compliance." Another pause. Longer this time. "You've always been like this," she said, finally, her tone shifting into something colder. "Everything has to be structured, defined, controlled." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped accepting things that weren't." That landed. I could feel it through the silence. Then she tried a different angle. "This isn't going to help Ava," she said. "Dragging this into a formal review, what do you think that teaches her?" I looked over at Ava, still asleep, curled up under the hotel blanket. "It teaches her that when something is wrong, you don't pretend it isn't," I said. Diane didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice had softened again, but not in the same way as before. This wasn't reassurance. It was strategy. "We can fix this," she said. "We can adjust future trips, make sure Ava is included. There's no reason to go through all of this." There it was. Future. Adjustment. The same language, just redirected. I leaned against the window. "This isn't about the next trip," I said. "It's about the pattern. And you think an attorney is going to solve that?" "I think documentation already did," I said. Another silence. "Then sharper Lauren is furious. That's her choice," I said. "She feels blindsided." I let out a small breath. "Ava felt excluded," I said, repeatedly. Diane didn't respond to that. Instead, she said, "You should have come to us first." I almost smiled. "I did," I said, "for 3 years. In conversations you controlled." That ended it. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just ended it. Diane didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue further. She just said, "We'll talk later," and hung up. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen for a second. There was no relief, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense that something had shifted into a space where it couldn't be pulled back. An hour later, Lauren texted, "We need to talk, now." I didn't respond. Instead, I got Ava ready for the day. We went down for breakfast, just the two of us this time. She picked pancakes with strawberries and spent 10 minutes arranging them before taking a bite. "Can we go to the beach after this?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "We can. No schedule to fit into. No group to align with. Just us." As we walked out toward the shoreline, my phone buzzed again. Another email from Daniel Harper. Shorter this time. "Reese, I've initiated the review process. Diane and Lauren have been notified. I've also requested full accounting of trust-funded travel expenditures over the past 5 years. 5 years. I read that line twice. That covered everything, every trip. Every adjustment, every quiet decision that had been treated like it didn't need to be explained. I looked out at the water, the horizon stretching clean and uninterrupted in front of us. Ava ran ahead a few steps, her sandals in her hand, laughing as the waves reached her feet. And for the first time since this started, I felt something settle that wasn't just clarity, it was space. Because whatever came next, whatever they said, whatever they tried to reframe, it wasn't going to happen in the dark anymore. And they knew it. They asked to meet that night. Not a casual, come join us for dinner, not a vague, we'll talk later. Lauren texted a time. Diane added a location, one of the private dining rooms just off the main restaurant. Neutral space, controlled lighting, no audience. For years, that would have worked on me. Structure had always been their advantage. This time I walked in already knowing what mattered and what didn't. Ava stayed upstairs with a movie and room service, something she'd chosen herself. She didn't ask where I was going. She just said, "Tell me how it goes when you get back." I told her I would. The private dining room was already set when I arrived. White tablecloth, water glasses placed precisely. Diane sat at the head of the table, Lauren to her right, Mark slightly off to the side like he'd been pulled into something he didn't want to lead. No one stood when I walked in. No one smiled. I took a seat across from them, placing my phone face down on the table, not as a statement, just as a habit. Diane started. "We've spoken with Daniel," she said. "I assumed you would." I replied. Lauren leaned forward immediately. "You've put us in a position where we have to justify years of decisions to someone outside the family." "Yes," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You don't see how extreme that is. I see how documented it is," I said. That slowed her down just enough. Diane folded her hands together. "The review is going to look at everything she said, every expense, every allocation. That includes things that have nothing to do with this situation. If they're compliant, that shouldn't be a problem," I said. "And if they're not," Lauren shot back. I met her gaze. "Then they shouldn't have happened." Silence settled over the table, not empty, heavy. Diane exhaled slowly. "Reese, we're trying to resolve this without it becoming something larger." "It already is," I said. "It doesn't have to be," she insisted. "We can correct the issue, include Ava moving forward, adjust how trips are structured. We're willing to put that in writing." There it was. The offer, future-focused, controlled, clean. I let it sit for a second before answering. "This isn't a forward-only problem," I said. "It's a documented pattern tied to shared funds." Lauren's voice sharpened. "So what, you want to punish us?" I shook my head slightly. "No." "Then what do you want?" she demanded. I didn't rush the answer. "I want accuracy," I said, "in how things are recorded, in how funds are used, in how decisions are made." "That's what we've always had," Diane said quickly. "No," I said. "That's what it looked like from the outside." Another silence. Mark shifted in his seat, finally speaking. "Maybe we should just agree on some guidelines and move forward?" Lauren shot him a look but didn't interrupt. I turned slightly toward him. "Guidelines are useful when everyone follows them," I said. But this wasn't a misunderstanding of guidelines. It was a choice to override them. Diane's voice lowered. "You're speaking like this is intentional wrongdoing." "It was intentional," I said. "You wrote it down." That was the moment everything tightened. Because there wasn't a way to soften that. Lauren leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "It was about presentation, yes, but not in the way you're making it sound." "We were thinking about the environment, the people involved, how things are perceived." "And you decided Ava didn't belong in that perception," I said. "She's a child," Lauren snapped. "These weren't kid-focused trips. They were funded by a structure that includes her," I replied. Diane raised a hand, slightly cutting in before Lauren could respond. "Enough," she said quietly. The room stilled. She looked at me. really looked this time without the usual layer of control. "What is your resolution?" she asked. Not what do you want. What is your resolution? That was different. I sat back slightly, folding my hands in front of me. First, I said full transparency on all trust-funded expenditures over the past 5 years. Not summaries, not explanations, records. Diane nodded slowly. That's already been requested. Second, I continued no future use of trust funds for travel without written approval across all beneficiary branches. Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again. Third, I said a formal acknowledgement that Ava was excluded from prior trips funded through shared resources. That's unnecessary, Lauren said immediately. It's accurate, I replied. It's inflammatory, she countered. It's documentation, I said. Diane didn't interrupt this time. She just listened. And last I said we operate separately from here on out. No assumptions about participation, no automatic inclusion, no quiet decisions made on my behalf or my daughter's. Lauren let out a short, disbelieving breath. So that's it. You're just stepping away. I'm setting a boundary, I said. That's not a boundary, Reese, she said. That's a withdrawal. I held her gaze. Yes, that landed harder than anything else I'd said, because it wasn't framed as a threat. It wasn't emotional, it was final. Diane sat very still for a moment, then she nodded once. If that's your decision, she said, we'll respect it. Lauren turned toward her sharply. Mom, it's done, Diane said, not raising her voice but ending the conversation. No more negotiation, no more reframing, just done. I stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to signal I was finished. As I reached the door, Diane spoke again. Reese. I paused, turning slightly. We didn't think it would become this, she said. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, that's because it didn't affect you the same way. And I walked out, back into the open air, back into a space where the tension of that room didn't follow me. Upstairs, Ava was exactly where I left her, half watching a movie, half asleep, her turtle still on the nightstand. She looked up when I came in. How did it go? She asked. I closed the door behind me. It went the way it needed to, I said. She studied my face for a second, then nodded. That was enough for her. And for the first time in a long time, it was enough for me too. We checked out 2 days early. Not in a dramatic way. No announcements, no final conversations in the lobby. I packed our things while Ava folded her clothes beside me, careful and deliberate, like she was part of the decision even without needing the details. Are we going home? She asked. Not yet, I said. I thought we'd go somewhere else first. Her face lit up just enough to tell me that mattered. We drove 3 hours north along the coast and checked into a smaller place, nothing like the resort my family had chosen. No marble floors, no private dining rooms, no curated atmosphere. Just a quiet beachfront inn, the kind where the front desk clerk actually looked at Ava when she spoke. 2 guests, he asked, smiling. 2, I said. He handed Ava her own keycard. She held it like it meant something. Because it did. That first evening we walked along the beach with no schedule to follow. Ava ran ahead, letting the water chase her feet, turning back every few seconds to make sure I was still there. I always was. There was no one to impress, no one to adjust for. No quiet rules shaping who belonged where. Just space and time. A few weeks later, the formal part of everything caught up. Daniel Harper sent a summary, not final conclusions, but enough to confirm what I already knew. There had been repeated use of trust funds for travel categorized as family-inclusive experiences. Documentation showed selective exclusion of one minor beneficiary, Ava, without formal approval or disclosure across all branches. It wasn't framed as punishment. It didn't need to be. The language was careful, measured exactly the way systems work when they rely on facts instead of emotion. Recommendations were made, new oversight protocols, mandatory co-approval for future allocations, full transparency requirements. Diane and Lauren didn't argue those. They couldn't. Not with everything in writing. They reached out separately, then together. Messages that sounded different from before, less certain, more aware. We didn't realize how it looked. We should have handled it differently. We want to fix this. I read them. I didn't respond right away. Not out of anger, out of intention, because fixing something doesn't always mean returning to it. A month later, I sent a short reply. I'm open to respectful communication moving forward, but access to me and Ava will be separate from shared financial structures. That boundary isn't negotiable. No accusations, no revisiting every detail, just clarity. They agreed, at least on paper. And that was enough. Ava adjusted faster than I expected. Kids do that when the environment around them stops shifting without explanation. She stopped asking why she wasn't included in things, stopped waiting for invitations that came with conditions she couldn't see. Instead, she started asking different questions. Where are we going next? What do you want to do this weekend? Simple things, normal things, the kind that don't require permission from anyone else. One night, a few months later, we were sitting on the couch planning a short trip for her birthday. She was flipping through options on my tablet, pointing at pictures with quiet excitement. What about this one, she asked. It has a pool and a game room. That looks fun, I said. She paused, then looked at me. Can it just be us? There was no hesitation in her voice. No doubt. Yeah, I said. It can just be us. She smiled and went back to scrolling. Like that was always an option, and maybe now it was. I still hear from my family, not often, not the same way. The conversations are careful now, structured. There are no more assumptions about inclusion, no more quiet decisions made on my behalf. Everything is asked, confirmed, documented. It's different, not warmer, but clearer. And clarity has its own kind of peace. Sometimes I think about that moment in the resort lobby, the way everything shifted, because someone read something out loud that had always been there. Not new, just finally visible. That's the thing about patterns like that. They don't stop because people feel bad. They stop when they can't stay hidden anymore. And once they're written down, once they're seen for what they are, you don't need to fight as hard. You just need to decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not. There's a difference between setting a boundary and trying to get even. One is about control, taking it back in a way that protects you and the people who depend on you. The other is about staying tied to the same cycle that hurt you in the first place. For a long time, I thought keeping the peace meant staying quiet, adjusting, giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when it cost me something. But peace without clarity isn't really peace. It's just silence that benefits someone else. If you've ever been in a situation where your role in a family felt conditional, where inclusion depended on how well you fit an image you didn't create, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not obligated to keep proving your worth in spaces that keep rewriting it. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you hate someone. It doesn't mean you're closing every door. It means you're deciding which doors stay open and under what conditions. And forgiveness, if it comes, doesn't mean access is restored. Those are two separate choices. If any part of this feels familiar, I'd really like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And if stories like this matter to you, stories about clarity, accountability, and finding your way back to something steady, feel free to subscribe. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.